About a month ago, I got an old secondhand bike from a friend. It wasn't in great shape, so I only rode it around my block a few times a week. I usually went riding in the evening, sometime between 6 and 9 p.m. One night after dinner, I decided to go for a ride around my block like I normally did. When I stepped outside, I noticed it was darker and quieter than usual. Most of the streetlights were off, and there weren't any cars on the road. It felt a little eerie, but I figured it meant I could ride freely up and down the middle of the street without worrying about traffic. My street has a sharp curve near the end, and another road starts right after that. I was riding pretty fast toward the curve when I noticed something strange. As I was turning, I suddenly saw a dark, skinny figure standing on the side of the road. The realization that someone was just standing there on my otherwise empty street startled me so much that I slammed on my brakes and skidded, causing me to fall off my bike. I quickly scrambled to my feet, feeling shaken and confused. When I looked to my left, the figure was still standing exactly where I had seen her. Thanks to one of the few working streetlights nearby, I could see that it was an older woman dressed entirely in black. She was staring intensely at me. Her presence had shocked me so much that I felt embarrassed. But what unsettled me more was that she continued to stare without saying a word, even after I had fallen. It felt strange and rude, in a way I couldn't quite explain. Trying to shake off the awkwardness, I smiled at her to show I was fine. She didn't react at all. She remained completely still, with no expression on her face. It was also very cold that night, and I couldn't understand why she was standing there in the middle of the street, seemingly for no reason. After taking a moment to collect myself, I got back on my bike. I glanced at her again. No change. She was still standing there, staring straight at me. At this point, I was starting to feel genuinely spooked. I rode off quickly and turned onto the next road, which loops around to the beginning of my street. I figured I would keep riding in a circle like usual. After a few minutes, I came back to the same spot where the woman had been standing. I assumed she would be gone by then, but no, she was still there in the exact same place. Curious and a little uneasy, I decided to ride past her slowly this time. As I got closer, I realized she was still staring directly at me. Her eyes were wide and intense, almost as if she was terrified of me, like she had seen a ghost. I smiled at her again, trying to be friendly, but as I passed, she slowly turned her head to follow me without breaking eye contact. I decided not to continue around the curve again. Instead, I made a U-turn and rode the opposite way, passing her one more time. But this time, I was too scared to look at her. As I headed back toward my house, riding faster this time, I suddenly saw two figures standing in the middle of the road ahead of me. I quickly swerved onto the footpath. As I passed by, I realized they were two men, standing completely still and staring right at me. They didn't move. They didn't say anything. They just watched me. I was terrified. I kept going toward my house, picking up speed. That's when I heard the sound of a car engine revving behind me. Panic hit me hard. I tried to ride as fast as I could, but I realized they were following me. Without thinking, I jumped off my bike and ran, adrenaline kicking in. I didn't even look behind me. I sprinted toward the nearest house, jumped over the fence, and hid behind a bush in their yard. Peeking through the fence, I watched as the car slowly crept down the street, like it was searching for me. It stopped where I had left my bike, and I saw the front door open. But nobody got out. I was frozen in fear, but knew I had to get away. I ran quietly along the fence line and made a decision to bolt out onto the street and run for home. I don't remember much except feeling like I was running faster than I ever had before, just hoping that whoever was out there wouldn't see me. Fortunately, it was dark enough that I managed to make it home safely. But I had to leave my bike behind. Once I was inside, I immediately looked out through my living room window blinds, expecting to see a car pull into my driveway, or worse. But nothing happened. Eventually, I calmed down enough to go to sleep. The next morning, I went out to check. My bike was gone. I still have no idea who those people were, why they were out there so late at night, or why they took my bike. But I haven't gone riding at night since. This happened about a year ago. I was visiting friends in the city about an hour's train ride from where I lived. It was getting late, and the last train was leaving in less than an hour. My friends lived about 10 minutes away from the train station by car, so I let them know I'd need a ride soon. The friend who had originally offered to drive me was too drunk by that point, so he ordered an Uber for me. Normally, I would have just stayed the night, but I was in my first trimester of pregnancy, and I just really wanted the comfort of my own bed and my boyfriend's support. We still had a little time before I needed to leave. As my friend was ordering the first ride, he took one look at the driver's profile picture and canceled. He said the guy seemed creepy. The second driver didn't look much better, but seemed a little less concerning, so he booked it. Looking back, the irony is unreal. The car showed up shortly after. I got in, and the driver said my friend's name, who, again, is a guy. I explained that my friend had ordered the ride for me, and that yes, I was the person he was picking up. Right away, he started asking personal questions. If my friend was my boyfriend, and when I said no, he started complimenting me. I gave polite answers, put in one earbud, and hoped he'd drop it. But he kept going, talking about how I deserved a boyfriend or something along those lines. Now, it's worth mentioning that I know the city pretty well. I lived there for years, and I know exactly how to get to the train station, which route makes sense depending on traffic, all of that. It was late on a weekday, so traffic wasn't an issue. Any logical route in the right direction would have worked. He plugged the address into his GPS, which was propped up on his dash. It told him to make a left at the next street, what he should have done, since the road we were on was a dead end. But as we started moving, he suddenly asked, "Do cops hang out around here?" It threw me off, but I figured maybe he just wanted to speed a little to get me there faster. I told him, not really. That's when he unexpectedly turned right, into a narrow alleyway, completely ignoring the GPS. The directions kept telling him to turn around, but he was heading in the opposite direction. I spoke up. "This isn't the right way," I said. At that point, he seemed to suddenly notice the GPS and acted like it was an innocent mistake. "I'll get you there," he said, "if you don't mind me speeding." Honestly, I just wanted to catch my train, so I said, "Sure," thinking maybe he'd get it together. Instead, he floored it. We shot forward, going 50 or 60 miles an hour, only for him to slam on the brakes at the next stop sign. This was a residential part of the city. The speed limit was maybe 25, with stop signs every block. He kept repeating the same pattern for 2 blocks, speeding recklessly, then slamming on the brakes. And then, he ignored the GPS completely and started heading in the wrong direction again. At this point, I was fully aware something was wrong. He wasn't taking me to the train station. I texted my friends, telling them what was happening. They told me to come back, but by then I was stubborn and still holding on to the hope that I could make the train. I tried one more time. "I'm going to be late," I told him. "This isn't the right way." He replied, "You won't be late for your train." But he had no idea when it was even leaving. A few minutes later, we were stopped at a red light. A newer Camaro pulled up behind us, following pretty closely. The driver suddenly asked, "Why are the cops following me?" I didn't respond. He kept asking louder each time until he was practically shouting, mumbling to himself between demands. Eventually, the Camaro turned off and he calmed down. By then, I noticed how much time had passed. It had been 15 minutes, and we weren't even a mile away from where I'd started. I definitely wasn't going to make my train. I told him to take me back to my friend's place. He insisted again that I'd make my train. But I was done. I got stern and told him he needed to take me back. He finally agreed, but not before slowing down at an intersection, almost coming to a complete stop next to a bus stop where a young woman was standing alone. That made me even more uneasy. At this point, my phone was buzzing constantly, and I think he noticed. He eventually drove me back, calmly this time, stopping just down the street from my friend's house. My friends were waiting at the door when I got out. As I walked toward them, I looked back and saw the driver parked further down the street, talking to someone in a hoodie standing on the sidewalk. I can only guess what his intentions were. Maybe he thought I was a tourist. After all, I had a huge backpack and another bag with me from the night before, and thought he could take advantage of that. I reported him immediately to Uber and on the local driver forums, hoping to keep this from happening to someone else. As I'm writing this, it's about 3 in the morning in Ghent, Belgium. I'm a college student here, living in the city. Most of the time, I make the most of student life while still keeping things pretty calm. I'll throw the occasional small party or get together with close friends at my place, mainly because I'm the only one without roommates and sometimes it's just easier. Yesterday was one of those nights. I invited 4 friends over for dinner, drinks, and some mindless YouTube videos. Typical stuff. As the night wore on, people slowly began to head home. Eventually, it was just me and a female friend left. She always stays until last because she's had a bad experience walking home alone. Some drunk creep followed her home once, and ever since, I always walk her back to her place. I don't mind. It's about a 30-minute walk to her place and another 30 to get back. And Ghent? It's a beautiful city, especially at night. Quiet, safe. At least, it usually feels that way. But not last night. We were about 20 minutes into the walk, passing by a small park next to the water. Locals call it the Dreidel Park because of the massive stone dreidel sculpture in the middle. It's a memorial for the Jewish community lost during World War II. Normally, this park is empty at night. During the day, students hang out there, maybe smoke a little weed. But after sundown, it's dead silent, except tonight there was someone there. He was standing by the public restroom at the edge of the park. At first glance, nothing seemed too weird about him. He was wearing a suit, kind of formal for midnight in the park, but it was the kind of thing you could chalk up to someone heading home from an event. Black pants, black vest, black shirt, but with a stark white tie that caught the streetlights in a strange way. His arms hung by his sides except for his right hand, where he was lazily twirling a set of keys around his finger. Over and over, the keys spun and clinked softly in the quiet night. But it wasn't the suit, or the keys, or even the fact that he was just standing there that got to me. It was his stare. At first, I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but as we got closer, I realized he was locked in on us. His gaze was unflinching. His right eye just a little more open than his left. Not enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. And it made the whole thing so much worse. We passed him without saying anything, but I could feel him watching us until we disappeared down the road. I thought that was the end of it. After I dropped off my friend and started heading home, I had to pass the same park again. As I approached, I heard it. The faint sound of keys spinning through the air, then slapping softly against a palm. He was still there. Same spot. Still staring. This time, I didn't look directly at him. I just kept walking, eyes ahead, focused. But the feeling was the same. His gaze burned into my back, heavy and unnerving. 20 meters down the road, the sound stopped. No more keys. I told myself not to look. I really did. But curiosity is a funny thing. I glanced back. He had started walking. Toward me. At first, I thought maybe he was just heading home. No big deal, right? So I crossed the street, just to be sure. But every time I checked the reflection in a shop window or a car mirror, he was still there. Same distance behind me. Same slow, deliberate pace. And always watching. The route back to my apartment crosses 2 bridges. The first one, not so bad. It leads deeper into the center of the city. Lots of lights, people, noise. But the second, that's where things get quiet again. It leads toward the outskirts, where I live. When I crossed the second bridge and realized he was still behind me, that's when it hit me. He wasn't just heading home. He was following me. I quickened my pace. So did he. But he didn't need to rush. His long legs made it easy to keep up without breaking a sweat. And that's when he started humming. It was this eerie, repetitive tune. Simple, but it got stuck in my head immediately. High note, lower note. Same high note. Pause. Repeat the same 3 notes, but slower. Then a final sequence. 3 fast notes followed by 2 deep, slow ones. Over and over and over again. It was the kind of melody you'd expect to hear in a horror movie, and it was coming from the man following me at midnight through an empty street. I didn't want him knowing where I lived, so I started taking random turns, circles, zigzags, doubling back, but he kept following. Every time I turned a corner and checked, there he was, humming, twirling his keys, and then he giggled. Not a laugh, not even a chuckle, a high-pitched schoolgirl giggle. And then he said it. I love games. His voice didn't match his appearance at all. It was deep, smooth, almost soothing, like a jazz singer's voice, the kind that would usually calm you down. But in that moment, it made my skin crawl. He picked up his pace, faster, closer, until I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I ran. I'm no marathoner, but I can sprint when I need to. I tore down the street, not daring to look back. I heard the sound of his shoes on the pavement behind me for a moment, then nothing. I didn't stop. I ran straight toward the city center, where the lights were bright and I prayed there would be people around. As I neared the square, I saw it. A tram, doors open. I bolted toward it just as they were about to close. The lights on the button blinked, then dimmed, locked. I was safe, for now. As the tram pulled away, I looked back. There he was, standing perfectly still at the tram stop, keys dangling from his hand, twisting them slowly. And even though I couldn't hear it through the glass, I could tell he was still humming that same cursed tune. I don't know who he was. I don't know why he chose me. But I really hope I never see him again.
In addition, YouTube's algorithm prioritizes videos with many likes and subscriptions. So, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe buttons to help more people see and know about this content. Thank you for watching and listening.